let's talk about the word cybersecurity. Back when I started in this business, nobody really talked about cybersecurity. It just wasn't a word anybody really used, at least not in commercial industry. It seems to have come mostly from the government. It hasn't been until the last, 5 or so years that I really started hearing people talk about cybersecurity. You hear people talk about the cyber even. I've heard certain politicians use that phrase. Oh yeah, I know all about the cyber and things like that. And it kind of originally came, it seems, from the term cyberspace. Back in the 1980s, when the concept of internetworked computers was just starting to take off, but it wasn't in everybody's homes yet, wouldn't be for another, 10, 20 years at that time. The idea of cyberspace was popularized in books like Neuromancer by William Gibson, one of my favorite novels of all time. I highly recommend it. It's a little bit difficult to read, and the plot is kind of convoluted, and his writing style is just kind of weird and flowery, but I love it. And so I think, what was it, Neil Stephenson maybe coined the term cyberspace. I'm not sure about that. It was either William Gibson or Neil Stephenson. It was one of those guys, but back in the mid 80s. And then in the 90s, when the internet came along, people really started talking about cyberspace for a while. At the same time, they were talking about surfing up the interwebs and things like that, right? But the term cyberspace just eventually fell out of favor. Eventually, the term cyberspace just fell out of favor. And eventually, the term cyberspace just fell out of favor, it seems. People don't really talk about it anymore. But cybersecurity seems to have come out of that and has begun to be used by mostly the government, or at least originally. But now it has filtered out into the rest of commercial industry. And so now when people ask me what I do, I tell them I work in cybersecurity. And it's actually taken me a while to get used to saying that, because for a long time it just felt really silly. And I still think it feels kind of silly, but that's just how it goes. Other terms that have been used traditionally, before cybersecurity came into vogue, were things like information security, or InfoSec for short, or information assurance, or risk management, or computer security, or data security. All those kind of things were used in the past and have been for many years, for decades. For a long time, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information has been a concern. But all of those things have been sort of wrapped up in the popular opinion by the term cybersecurity. Let's talk about some more terms related to people and what they do in this area. We've got the word hacker, of course, and I explained earlier that I consider myself a hacker, although mostly in the traditional sense of people who like to solve puzzles and work with computers and explore things like that. There are also, of course, the negative connotation to hacker. And we also have this idea of the black hat hacker or white hat hacker. And there may be some political correctness coming into play. Maybe we're not calling it black hat hacker anymore. I'm not quite sure. I don't know what the more modern accepted term is at the moment. But the black hat hacker was like the guy from the old cowboy movies who wore the black hat. And you may not be familiar with that reference. It was even before my time. But once upon a time, there were westerns, cowboy movies in the movies, and you could always tell who the bad guy was because he was the guy wearing the black hat. And the good guy was wearing the white hat. So the black hat hacker would be the guy who would break into your computer and steal your data and do bad stuff, encrypt your data for a ransom and things like that. Whereas the white hat hacker would be someone more like me, presumably. I am much more on the defensive side. I help people to protect their systems from the bad guys, the black hat hackers, or the threat actors, if you want to use certain certain people's vocabularies for those bad guys, or intruders, or what, threat actors, or what else? There are several other terms that various different books and methodologies refer to what I call the bad guys. But then you've got gray hat hackers. Those are people who maybe they can go either way. Maybe they find vulnerabilities, they don't exploit them, but they might sell them to somebody who might exploit them. I would consider that a gray hat hacker. Some people might just consider that straight up black hat if you're not doing what's called responsible disclosure, but maybe that's a matter of opinion. But yeah, there is something called a gray hat hacker. Then you've got red teams and blue teams. The red team are the pen test guys, or penetration testers. Those are the ones who you generally pay, and they test your security within rules of engagement. And there's a contract, and all the formalities are hopefully put into place to make it sanctioned and legitimate and safe. But that's what the red team does. Then there's something called blue team, which is, again, more like what I do. The blue team defends the infrastructure. They harden the infrastructure. They monitor it. And by infrastructure, I mean computer systems and networks and things like that. So you've got your red team, the attackers, the pen testers. You got your blue team, the defenders, the system administrators, the DevOps guys, all those people, your security engineers and your security architects, your security operations center, your security analysts. Those guys are all considered blue team. Or you might hear about offensive security and defensive security. Same thing, pretty much. You got your offensive security, your red team, your pen test, your defensive security, your blue team, your security analysts, security engineers, people like that.